They say every cop has one case they can't forget. For me, it wasn't a gruesome murder or a grisly accident. It was something I still can't explain. And if you're smart, you'll listen to this and never drive alone at night again. It started on a rainy Thursday in April. My partner, Sam, had called in sick, leaving me to patrol the outskirts of Pine Ridge on my own. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, making the already dark roads even harder to navigate. I was halfway through my shift when the call came in. Unit 417, check possible disturbance near Old Mill Road. Multiple 911 calls reporting loud screams and lights in the woods. Old Mill Road wasn't exactly a hotspot for action. The place was a relic from the town's logging days, now overgrown and forgotten, with nothing but stories of weird sightings and ghost tales to keep it relevant. But a call was a call. When I pulled up, the rain eased up, but fog had rolled in like a scene out of an old horror movie. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I left my cruiser by the gravel road and grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the dense mist as I stepped into the trees. I hadn't gone far when I saw it. A faint, flickering light in the distance. It didn't look like a flashlight or a fire, more like an old-school lantern swaying in the darkness. I radioed dispatch to report my location, but all I got was static. Typical. The light kept moving deeper into the woods. I told myself it was probably some campers or drunk teenagers, but something about the way it moved, so smooth, like it was floating, set my nerves on edge. I followed it anyway because that's what we do, right? Protect and serve. As I got closer, the light vanished, leaving me in pitch black. Then I heard it, a low growl, guttural and wet, like an animal choking. My heart raced as I swung the flashlight around, the beam dancing off the twisted trees. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing back in a way that made the woods feel even emptier. That's when I saw it. A figure crouched low to the ground, its back turned to me. It was pale, almost translucent, and its limbs were wrong. Too long, too thin. It looked up suddenly, its face snapping toward me. Only it didn't have a face. Just smooth, featureless skin stretched over a skull-like shape. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The thing let out a screech that sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixed with static, then bolted toward me on all fours. I didn't think. I just ran. My boots slipped on the wet forest floor as I sprinted back toward the cruiser. The sound of that thing crashing through the underbrush was deafening, like something much larger than what I had seen. My flashlight's beam bobbed wildly in the darkness, barely illuminating the path ahead. When I broke through the tree-line, I spotted the faint outline of my cruiser in the fog. Relief flooded me, until I saw the headlights flicker and die, leaving me in total darkness. "No, no, no," I gasped, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. That awful screech rang out again, closer this time. I made it to the car and yanked the door open, diving inside and slamming it shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I turned it and the engine coughed but didn't start. Again. Nothing. The screech came again, this time from directly behind me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror. At first, I saw nothing but fog swirling around the back window. Then, slowly, a shape emerged. A distorted, featureless head, pressed against the glass. It wasn't just looking in. It was grinning. I screamed and twisted the key again. The engine roared to life and I slammed the car into reverse. The figure disappeared, but the sound of something heavy hitting the trunk told me it wasn't gone. My cruiser jolted as I hit the gas, speeding backward down the gravel road. Branches scraped against the sides of the car as I fishtailed around a bend, the thing still clinging to the roof. I reached for the radio, praying that somehow the static had cleared. "This is Officer Daniels, Unit 417. I'm being pursued by..." I hesitated, unsure how to describe what was happening. "I need backup at Old Mill Road. Now." Nothing, just more static. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the thing forward off the roof. The car lurched to a stop, and for a brief second, Everything was silent except for the rain tapping against the windshield. Then it stood up. In the glow of my headlights, I saw it clearly for the first time. Its limbs were grotesquely long, its torso twisted and unnaturally thin. The skin was stretched tight, almost translucent, revealing veins pulsing underneath. It turned its featureless head toward me, as if it could see despite having no eyes, and tilted it in a slow, unnatural motion. Then it charged. I threw the car into drive, tires spinning on the wet gravel as I floored it. The thing didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. Too fast, too smooth. It kept pace with the car, one clawed hand slamming against the passenger side window, leaving deep gouges in the glass. I did the only thing I could think of. I veered off the road. The cruiser tore through the underbrush, crashing over roots and rocks as I pushed the engine to its limit. The thing was right beside me, its claws raking against the metal door. Then suddenly it stopped. The car burst out of the woods and onto the main road. I didn't stop to question it. I drove straight to the station, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I finally parked and stumbled inside, drenched and shaking, the other officers stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to me. The chief ordered me to sit down and take a breath. He handed me a cup of coffee, and I noticed his hand was shaking too. "Old Mill Road," he said quietly. "It's always Old Mill Road." The chief's words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic. I stared at him, trying to piece together what he meant, but his expression said enough. He knew something, and whatever it was, it scared him. "Chief," I said, my voice hoarse, "what the hell is out there?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the room, ensuring no one was within earshot. Then he leaned in close and whispered, "You're not the first, Daniels." My stomach dropped. "Not the first to see it?" He shook his head. "Not the first to survive it." The room suddenly felt colder. I gripped the coffee cup tighter, hoping it would steady the tremor in my hands. "What is it?" I asked again, this time more forcefully. The chief sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "We call it the Wraith. Don't ask me where it came from or what it wants. I don't know, but it's been stalking that stretch of woods for as long as I've been in this job. Longer even. And anyone who's seen it, well, let's just say you're lucky to be here. Why didn't anyone warn me?" My voice rose, anger cutting through my fear. "You sent me out there blind. Because warning doesn't help," the chief snapped, his voice low but firm. "We've tried everything, warnings, roadblocks, hell, even exorcisms. Nothing stops it. The only thing you can do is survive and hope it doesn't follow you home." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Follow me home?" The chief didn't respond, just gave me a look that said everything I needed to know. The next few days were hell. I barely slept, jumping at every shadow and strange noise. At first, I thought I was just paranoid. But then, things started happening. It began with small stuff. Lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own. Then I started hearing it. The same low growl I'd heard in the woods, coming from somewhere inside my house. I searched every corner, every closet, but there was nothing there. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom window wide open, rain pouring in and soaking the floor. I swore I had locked it before going to bed. But the worst part wasn't the open window. It was the muddy handprint on the sill, too large and too distorted to be human. That's when I decided to set up cameras around the house. If this thing was stalking me, I needed proof. The first night, the footage was uneventful. Just hours of me pacing around the house, unable to sleep. But on the second night, around 3 a.m., one of the cameras picked up movement. It started in the backyard, just beyond the tree line. A shadow emerged, tall and spindly, its limbs bending in ways that made my skin crawl. It moved closer, stepping into the glow of the porch light. I froze as I watched the screen. It was the Wraith, its featureless head tilting side to side, as if searching. Then it looked directly at the camera. The feed cut to static. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to be a sitting duck. I packed a bag, grabbed my service weapon, and drove straight to the station. The chief was waiting for me, almost like he knew I'd be there. He didn't say anything, just handed me a folder. Inside were reports, dozens of them spanning decades, all describing encounters with the Wraith. Some were from cops like me, others were from hikers, hunters, even construction workers trying to clear land near Old Mill Road. The details varied, but the pattern was always the same. Sightings, followed by disturbances, and then disappearances. What happens to the ones who don't survive? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The chief's face darkened. Most are never found. The ones who are... He hesitated, then handed me a photo. I wished he hadn't. It was a crime scene photo, blurred and grainy, but the image was unmistakable. A body, twisted and mangled, like it had been crushed and stretched at the same time. The face was frozen in a look of pure terror, its eyes wide and unseeing. I swallowed hard, forcing the bile back down. So what do we do? The chief met my gaze, his expression grim. We don't. The Wraith doesn't stop, Daniels. You can run, you can hide, but in the end, it always gets what it wants. I couldn't accept it, just waiting to be picked off like prey. There had to be a way to stop this thing. If not for me, then for whoever it might target next. I spent the next few hours digging through the reports, searching for patterns, clues, anything that could give me an edge. Most of it was the same. People seeing the Wraith, hearing the growls, and then either vanishing or ending up in a state no coroner could explain. But there was one report that stood out. It was an old file from 1987, handwritten and yellowed with age. The officer who filed it, a Sergeant Bill Forrester, claimed to have injured the Wraith. The report described how he had encountered it near the old mill and fired his weapon in panic. He believed he hit it because it let out a piercing shriek and fled into the woods, leaving behind a strange, dark liquid that wasn't blood but reeked of sulfur. The kicker? Forrester disappeared 2 days later. The case was closed as an unexplained disappearance, but the details gave me an idea. If it could bleed or whatever that dark liquid was, maybe it could be hurt, maybe it could be killed. That night, I returned to Old Mill Road. I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone willingly go back there? Honestly, I couldn't give you a good answer. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was desperation. All I know is I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. I parked the cruiser just outside the treeline, checking my gear one last time. Flashlight? Check. Gun? Fully loaded. And in a stroke of either genius or lunacy, I had grabbed a flare gun from the station's supply closet. If this thing was as unnatural as it seemed, maybe fire would work where bullets might not. The woods were just as eerie as before, the fog thick and oppressive. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing, but I pressed on, following the faint scent of sulfur in the air. After what felt like hours, I reached the clearing near the old mill. The structure was a decayed husk, its wooden frame leaning precariously, as if it could collapse at any moment. And there, in the center of the clearing, was the Wraith. It was hunched over something, a deer, or what was left of one. Its long, clawed hands worked methodically, stripping flesh from bone. I must have stepped on a branch because its head snapped up, its featureless face turning toward me. My blood turned to ice as it let out that bone-chilling screech and charged. I raised my gun and fired. The first shot missed, the second grazed its shoulder. The creature let out a howl, but it didn't stop. I emptied the clip, the bullets hitting its torso and legs, each one drawing that strange, black liquid. The Wraith staggered but kept coming, relentless. I fumbled for the flare gun, barely managing to load it as the creature closed the distance. It lunged, its claws swiping inches from my face. I fired the flare point blank into its chest. The impact sent it reeling, a bright red glow engulfing its torso. The Wraith writhed and screamed, the sound so loud and unnatural it felt like it was vibrating through my skull. The fire spread quickly, consuming its twisted limbs and translucent skin. It collapsed to the ground, flailing as the flames turned it to ash. I stood there, panting and shaking, the acrid smell of burning sulfur filling the air. The wraith was gone, reduced to nothing but a smoldering black stain on the forest floor. When I returned to the station, the chief was waiting for me. He didn't say anything as I walked in, covered in mud and ash. He just nodded, as if he somehow knew. "Did you get it?" he asked finally. "I think so," I said, though the doubt lingered in my mind. Creatures like that, they don't just die, do they? The chief clapped me on the shoulder. "Let's hope you're right. It's been 6 months since that night. The disturbances near Old Mill Road stopped, and for a while I thought I was free of it. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faintest growl outside my window. And when I do, I can't help but wonder, did I kill it, or did I just make it angry?" The nightmares started soon after. At first, I chalked them up to stress, reliving that night in vivid detail, the screeching sound of the wraith as it burned, the sulfuric stench clinging to my clothes. But the dreams weren't just memories. They were wrong. In one, I was standing in the woods again, but everything was silent. No wind, no animals, not even the crunch of leaves under my feet. Then, from the shadows, it would emerge. The wraith, whole and unburned, its featureless face turned toward me. It didn't screech this time. It whispered. I never remembered the words when I woke up, only the feeling. A cold dread that clung to me like a second skin. I tried to ignore it, to move on with my life, but the signs were everywhere. Lights flickering at the station, static on the radio that no one else seemed to hear. And then one night, I came home to find my front door ajar. My heart sank as I drew my weapon and stepped inside. The air inside the house was freezing, my breath visible in the dim light. I checked every room, every closet, but found nothing out of place, except for one thing. On the living room wall, scrawled in black ash, were 3 words. "You burned me." The chief didn't believe me when I told him. "You've been through hell, Daniels," he said. "It's messing with your head. Take some time off." Time off? As if a vacation would fix this. Still, I didn't argue. I packed a bag and left town, heading to a cabin my uncle owned up in the mountains. No people, no distractions, just me and the open wilderness. I told myself it was a chance to clear my head, to figure out what was real and what wasn't. The first few days were peaceful, even relaxing. I went hiking, fishing, anything to keep my mind busy. But on the 3rd night, I woke to the sound of scratching. It was faint at first, like tree branches against the window, but then it grew louder, more deliberate. Something was outside. I grabbed my flashlight and my gun, heart pounding as I crept to the window. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the empty forest. I exhaled, my breath fogging up the glass. Then the scratching started again, this time at the back door. I moved quickly, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. The back door rattled as something pressed against it, the wood creaking under the strain. I braced myself and yanked it open, the flashlight cutting through the cold night air. Nothing, just the forest, silent and still. But as I stepped back inside, I noticed something on the ground. Footprints. Not human, not animal. Long, clawed impressions that led from the door to the edge of the woods and disappeared into the trees. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't killed it. I'd only delayed it. The next few nights were a blur of fear and exhaustion. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, watching, waiting. The scratches came every night, always at a different door or window, always stopping just before I could catch it. It was toying with me, and it knew I was helpless. By the 5th night, I was at my breaking point. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep hiding. If this thing wanted me, it would have to come and take me. I barricaded the doors and windows, armed myself with every weapon I had, and sat in the center of the cabin, waiting. Hours passed. The wind howled. The fire in the hearth flickered and died. And then, the scratching started. This time, it didn't stop. The sound moved around the cabin, faster and louder, as if the wraith was circling, testing my defenses. Then came the screech, the same ear-piercing cry I'd heard that night on Old Mill Road. The windows shattered, the door splintered, and it was inside. It moved like a shadow, slipping through the darkness, its grotesque limbs bending and twisting as it closed the distance. I fired shot after shot, the bullets ripping through its translucent body. But they didn't slow it down. Desperate, I grabbed the flare gun. My hand shook as I aimed, waiting until it was inches away before pulling the trigger. The flare struck its chest, igniting its body in a burst of light and fire. The wraith shrieked, thrashing wildly as the flames consumed it. But this time it didn't collapse. It lunged at me, its claws raking across my chest as we both went down. The fire spread, engulfing the cabin as we struggled. I felt its claws dig into my shoulders, its weight crushing me as the flames licked at my skin. With one final, desperate effort, I grabbed the flare gun and jammed it into its chest, pulling the trigger again. The wraith let out a final, deafening scream as its body disintegrated into ash, the fire consuming everything around us. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, covered in burns and bandages. The fire had destroyed the cabin, but somehow I'd survived. The doctors said a hiker had found me unconscious near the edge of the woods, but I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there. The chief visited me a few days later. He didn't say much, just handed me a folder with a single photo inside. A black stain on the forest floor, surrounded by charred wood and ash. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The chief didn't answer. He just patted my shoulder and left. It's been weeks now, and the nightmares haven't stopped. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear it, the faintest whisper, carried on the wind, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting for me. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly returned to what some might call normal. The nightmares didn't come as often, and the whispers faded into memories I tried to bury. The department deemed me unfit for active duty, so I was transferred to desk work. A blessing in disguise, honestly. After everything that happened, I wasn't keen on late-night patrols or dark woods ever again. But something still lingered in the back of my mind. The wraith wasn't just some freak occurrence or urban legend. It was part of something bigger, something I hadn't yet grasped. The file the chief gave me was proof enough. It had happened before, and deep down I knew it would happen again. It was a quiet Friday evening when the call came in. My desk phone buzzed, and I hesitated before picking it up. It was the chief. "Daniels," he said, his voice grave. "We've got another one." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "There's been a sighting," he continued, "near the old power plant on the edge of town. Same MO, fog, lights, and something else." I didn't need him to elaborate. I knew exactly what he was talking about. "You sure it's the same thing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "There's no doubt. I wouldn't have called you otherwise." I wanted to say no, to tell him I was done with this nightmare. But something inside me, maybe stubbornness, maybe stupidity, forced the words out. "I'm on my way." The power plant had been abandoned for decades, a hulking skeleton of rusted metal and shattered glass. As I approached, the first thing I noticed was the fog, thicker than any I'd ever seen, swallowing my cruiser's headlights whole. The air was heavy, carrying that same acrid stench of sulfur that I thought I'd left behind. I parked and stepped out, flashlight and flare gun at the ready. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my boots. I moved cautiously, the beam of my flashlight sweeping across the crumbling buildings and overgrown weeds. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It was tall and spindly, its limbs unnaturally long, its head tilted at an angle that made my stomach churn. But something was different this time. Its body wasn't translucent like before. It was solid, almost human. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the metal walls. "Who's there?" The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, and that's when I realized it wasn't alone. More shapes emerged from the fog, surrounding it. They were people, or at least they had been. Their movements were jerky, robotic, their faces blank and emotionless. One by one, they turned to face me, and then, in perfect unison, they started walking toward me. The revelation, I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Stay back!" I yelled, but they didn't stop. Their movements were too synchronized, too unnatural. And as they drew closer, I saw it. The black veins running beneath their skin, pulsing like a heartbeat. The wraith wasn't just a predator. It was a parasite. These people weren't alive, at least not in the way I understood. They were hosts, their bodies twisted and controlled by whatever force the wraith had left behind. And now they were coming for me. I fired the flare gun into the closest figure. The flare hit its chest and erupted in flames, but the others didn't even flinch. They kept advancing, their eyes, if you could call them that, glowing faintly in the fog. Panic set in. I turned and ran, weaving through the ruins of the power plant. The fog seemed to thicken around me, the sulfuric stench burning my throat. I could hear their footsteps, relentless and mechanical, closing in from all sides. The final stand, I stumbled into an old control room, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled to lock it as the footsteps grew louder. The room was small and cluttered, filled with rusted equipment and broken monitors. In the corner, I spotted a half-empty gas canister and a box of matches. Desperation took over. I doused the room in gasoline, every surface slick and reeking of fuel. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Then the door exploded inward. The figures poured in, their movements relentless, their glowing eyes fixed on me. I lit a match, the flame small but fierce in the suffocating darkness. "If you're taking me," I said, my voice steady despite the terror in my chest, "you're coming with me." I dropped the match. Aftermath: the explosion rocked the power plant, a fiery blast that lit up the night sky and shattered windows for miles. I don't remember much after that, just the heat, the roar of the flames, and the sensation of being thrown through the air. When I woke up, I was in the hospital again. The chief was there, his face pale and drawn. "You did it," he said quietly. "They're gone." "Are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The chief didn't answer. He just handed me a new file. On the front was a name I didn't recognize and a date from 3 days ago. Inside were photos, blurry, grainy images of something tall and spindly, standing in the fog near an old quarry. The wraith wasn't gone. It had just moved on. The cycle continues now. Every time the phone rings, I brace myself. Every time the fog rolls in, I feel that familiar dread creeping up my spine. I know it's only a matter of time before the wraith resurfaces, before the cycle starts again. And when it does, someone will have to face it. Someone like me. I couldn't let it end like that. The wraith wasn't just a force of nature, it was hunting, expanding its reach, turning innocent people into whatever those things were. And as much as I wanted to run, to forget, something kept pulling me back in. I spent weeks piecing together what little I could find about similar cases. Old police reports, local legends, even conspiracy forums, anything that might give me an edge. The patterns were clear. The wraith was moving. The sightings were like a spreading infection, jumping from one isolated area to the next. Then I found it. A report buried deep in an old city archive, dated 1952. It described a similar entity, referred to as the Phantom of Black Hollow. The description matched the wraith almost perfectly, faceless, grotesque, and leaving a trail of missing people in its wake. The report mentioned that a group of locals had attempted to trap it, using fire and some kind of ceremonial object. The object? A black mirror. The mirror tracking down the mirror was like chasing a ghost. I visited libraries, museums, and obscure collectors until I finally found it. An artifact tucked away in the basement of a crumbling historical society. The curator didn't know much about it, just that it had been donated decades ago with no explanation. It wasn't much to look at. A hand-sized shard of polished black stone, jagged around the edges. But the moment I touched it, I felt a chill run through me. The surface seemed to ripple, as if it were alive. "Be careful with that," the curator warned. "Some say it's cursed." "Yeah," I muttered. "I'm counting on it." Back to the beginning, Old Mill Road. Of course, it had to end where it started. I waited until nightfall, the mirror clutched tightly in one hand and my flare gun in the other. The fog rolled in right on schedule, thick and suffocating. The air grew colder, and that familiar stench of sulfur seeped into my lungs. Then I heard it, the screech. The wraith appeared like a shadow stepping out of the mist, its grotesque body towering over me. It didn't charge this time. It stood there watching, or at least I thought it was watching. The air around it seemed to shimmer, bending light like heat off pavement. I raised the mirror. The wraith froze, its body twitching erratically. The shimmering grew stronger, and for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. "You know what this is, don't you?" I said, my voice trembling. "You've seen it before." The wraith let out a guttural growl, deeper and more resonant than anything I'd heard. It backed away, its limbs twisting unnaturally, but I didn't let up. I advanced, holding the mirror out like a shield. The wraith screeched louder, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. The fog thickened, swirling around us like a living thing. My heart pounded as the mirror grew warm in my hand, its surface rippling faster. I remembered the report's description, fire and the mirror. It was my only shot. I dropped the flare gun and pulled out a lighter, flicking it on with shaky hands. "You're not getting away this time," I muttered. The wraith lunged. I didn't think. I thrust the mirror forward, aiming the flame at its surface. The ripple turned into a blinding glow, and the wraith howled, its body writhing as the light engulfed it. The ground trembled. The fog swirled faster, forming a vortex around the mirror. The wraith's screeches turned into a distorted roar as its form began to break apart, piece by piece, dissolving into the swirling light. And then, silence. The aftermath. When I woke up, the sun was rising. The fog was gone, and so was the wraith. The mirror lay shattered at my feet, its shards reflecting the golden light of dawn. I stumbled back to my cruiser, exhausted but alive. For the first time in months, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Back at the station, the chief listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. "You think it's really gone?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if it comes back, we'll be ready." He nodded, then slid a fresh file across the desk. "Good, because there's something you need to see." I opened the file and froze. The photos inside showed a quarry, different from the last one, but the markings were unmistakable. Claw marks, black veins, and in the corner of one photo, barely visible, was the faint outline of a figure in the fog. The wraith wasn't gone. It was just getting started. I stared at the file in disbelief. The wraith wasn't just back. It was spreading. Each new location seemed further from the last, like a ripple expanding outward. But why? What was it looking for? I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror had done more than hurt it. Maybe it had awakened something, or maybe it had merely delayed the inevitable. Whatever the case, this wasn't over. "You can walk away, Daniels," the chief said, his voice quieter now. "No one would blame you, but I couldn't. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd done." The wraith wasn't just my problem anymore. It was a threat to anyone and everyone it crossed paths with. And if no one else was going to stop it, I had to. The new trail, the latest sightings, led to an abandoned mining town called Grayson's Hollow. Once a booming coal town, it had been abandoned decades ago after a massive fire wiped out half the population. The place had a reputation for being haunted, but what I found there was far worse. I arrived just before dusk, armed with every piece of gear I could scrounge up. Flares, firearms, a homemade flamethrower rigged from a propane tank, and a new artifact, a shard of reflective obsidian rumored to repel malevolent entities. The town was a ghostly shell of its former self. Crumbling buildings leaned precariously, their windows shattered and gaping like empty eye sockets. The air was thick with ash and the faint stench of sulfur. And then I saw the first sign. Claw marks carved deep into the side of an old water tower. The encounters as night fell, the fog rolled in, swallowing the town in a dense, suffocating gray. My flashlight barely pierced the gloom, its beam dancing off the dilapidated buildings. That's when the voices started. Whispers, faint and indistinct, carried on the wind. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, overlapping in a chaotic, maddening chorus. "Help me," one voice murmured. "Run," hissed another. I spun around, my grip tightening on the flamethrower. The whispers grew louder, closer, until they became a single, deafening scream. And then I saw them, the hosts. Dozens of them emerged from the fog, their movements jerky and inhuman. Their eyes glowed faintly, veins of black coursing under their pale skin. They moved as one, their footsteps synchronized, their faces blank. At the center of the crowd stood the Wraith. The battle, it was larger now, its limbs longer and more grotesque. Its body pulsed with dark energy, and the air around it shimmered like heat waves. The Wraith raised one spindly arm, and the hosts surged forward. I fired the flamethrower, the burst of fire lighting up the fog. The first wave of hosts fell, their bodies writhing and crumbling into ash. But there were too many. For every one I took down, 3 more seemed to take its place. The Wraith screeched, its voice reverberating through the air, and suddenly the flamethrower's flame sputtered and died. "Not now," I muttered, frantically trying to reignite the pilot light. The hosts closed in, their hands clawing at me. I swung the obsidian shard, the reflective surface glowing faintly as it connected with one of them. The host shrieked and disintegrated, but the others didn't stop. Desperation took over. I grabbed a flare and jammed it into the propane tank's nozzle, igniting the remaining fuel in a massive explosion. The blast sent me flying, the heat searing my skin as the shockwave tore through the crowd. The final confrontation, when I came to, the Wraith was standing over me. Its featureless face loomed close, and I felt the same cold dread that had haunted me since the first night I saw it. But this time I wasn't afraid. I gripped the obsidian shard and drove it into the Wraith's chest. The creature let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing as black veins spread outward from the wound. The shard glowed brighter, and the Wraith began to dissolve, its form breaking apart like smoke caught in a strong wind. But as it disintegrated, I felt something pull at me, a dark, suffocating force trying to drag me into the void with it. "No," I growled through clenched teeth. "Not this time." With every ounce of strength I had left, I yanked the shard free and staggered to my feet. The Wraith let out one final, agonized scream before vanishing into the fog. The cost by the time the fog cleared, the town was silent. The hosts were gone, their bodies reduced to piles of ash. The Wraith's black veins had burned into the ground, forming a pattern I didn't recognize. A warning, maybe, or a promise. I made my way back to the car, exhausted and battered. As I drove away from Grayson's Hollow, the sun rose, casting its warm light over the ruins. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe it was over, but deep down I knew better. The Wraith was gone, for now, but something else was coming, and when it did, I'd be ready. Weeks passed, and for the first time in nearly a year, my life felt normal again. The fog, the whispers, the scratching at my windows, all of it had stopped. Even the nightmares were fading, replaced by an eerie stillness. But that stillness came with a weight, a sense of unfinished business. I spent my days combing through old files, searching for any sign that the Wraith or something like it might still be out there. But there was nothing. No sightings, no strange occurrences. It was as if the Wraith had never existed. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The final visit one night, as I was finishing up some paperwork at the station, the chief called me into his office. He looked tired, older somehow, and slid a single envelope across the desk. "This came in the mail today," he said. Inside was a black and white photograph. It showed an empty street shrouded in fog, the faint outline of a figure barely visible in the distance. The handwriting on the back was simple but chilling. "It's not over." I stared at the photo, my chest tightening. Where was this taken? The chief hesitated. "A town called Brookhaven, couple 100 miles from here. They've been reporting disturbances." I clenched my jaw. "You're sending me, aren't you?" The chief shook his head. "No, this time you don't have to go. "You've done enough." But we both knew I couldn't walk away. The drive to Brookhaven was long and uneventful, but the closer I got, the heavier the air felt. By the time I reached the town limits, the sky had darkened, and a familiar fog was creeping over the roads. Brookhaven was small, quiet, and unremarkable, exactly the kind of place where something like the Wraith would thrive. The locals were tight-lipped, but their fear was palpable. They spoke in hushed tones about strange lights, missing livestock, and whispers in the fog. Felt like déjà vu. The final confrontation that night, I stood at the edge of the woods, clutching the shard of obsidian that had saved me before. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around me like a living thing. The air reeked of sulfur, and the whispers started again, faint but growing louder. Then it appeared. The Wraith stepped out of the mist, larger and more terrifying than I'd ever seen. Its body pulsed with dark energy, its limbs contorting unnaturally as it moved. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it, dozens of hosts emerged, their glowing eyes fixed on me. "Come on," I muttered, gripping the shard tightly. "Let's finish this." The Wraith let out a bone-chilling screech, and the hosts charged. The final sacrifice, I fought like hell, the obsidian shard cutting through the hosts with ease. But for every one I took down, more seemed to take its place. The Wraith watched from the edge of the battle, its featureless face turned toward me, waiting. I realized then what I had to do. The shard wasn't just a weapon, it was a key, a tether to whatever realm the Wraith had come from. If I wanted to end this, I had to sever that connection. With a deep breath, I ran straight toward the Wraith. Its screech filled the air as it lunged at me, its claws raking across my chest. I plunged the shard into its core, the obsidian glowing brighter than ever. The ground shook, the fog swirling into a vortex around us. The Wraith's body convulsed, its dark energy spilling out like a ruptured dam. And then, everything went white. The aftermath, I woke up in a hospital bed, my body aching but alive. The doctors couldn't explain how I'd gotten there or why I didn't have a scratch on me despite the torn and burned remains of my clothes. The news from Brookhaven was stranger still. The fog had lifted, the whispers were gone, and the missing people had returned, disoriented but alive. The Wraith was gone, for good this time, or so I hoped. The closure a month later, I left the force. I couldn't go back to being a cop, not after everything I'd seen. Instead, I started writing, documenting every detail of my encounters. I wanted people to know the truth, to be prepared if something like the Wraith ever returned. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to believe that sharing my story would keep the darkness at bay. Because while the Wraith was gone, I knew the world was full of things we didn't understand. Things waiting in the shadows, in the fog, for someone foolish enough to stumble into their path. And if they ever come for me again, I'll be ready. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.